I've been helping people become doctors for 10 years, and in this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about how to write an S-tier personal statement. I'm going to take you through the exact method that I've taught to my clients who've gotten into their top choice medical schools and even gotten scholarships every single year. We're going to dispel the common myths that most people think are true when they start writing their personal statements. And I'm going to take you through the EII or I method that I've been using with my clients for the past decade. We'll also go through some specific examples and talk about the 10 most common mistakes that I see people make when they're writing their med school personal statement. Before we get into the method, we have to understand what the personal statement is actually for. Most candidates think about it from their own perspective, but they don't think about the admissions committee. So let's start there and get ahead of the pack. Imagine that you are an admissions dean at your top choice medical school. You're looking at thousands of personal statements. And by the time those personal statements are on your desk, these are all qualified applicants. Their metrics are good enough, their experiences position them as well-qualified, well-explored candidates. How are you going to tell them apart? Let me take you through a thought experiment that I've been using with my clients. Imagine that two people go visit the same town. It's a very impoverished town. There's a lot of crime, hardship, illness, and low access to resources. After they come back, both of these people are sitting down with their friends and talking about what they saw. The first person talks about what a terrible place it was. They talk about all of the poverty and the poor infrastructure and how they think the entire town should be torn down and replaced with a strip mall. The second person has had the same experience, but they talk about how inspired they were by the people there, by the resilience and the community and the amazing things that people were able to accomplish despite very limited resources. They're excited by a number of things they want to do to help that community. Which applicant would you admit to your medical school? 9 times out of 10, my clients say it's that second candidate, but the question for us is why? Clearly, it wasn't the experience that set them apart. They both did the same thing. There were exactly 2 things that set them apart. Number 1 was their insight. What did they learn from having that experience? Number 2, their inspiration. What did they want to do as a consequence of having had those experiences? Insight and inspiration are the 2 biggest things that differentiate people on the med school application. Let's think about it one other way. When you apply to medical school, you are going to write a work and activities section. Comment below if you want me to make a video about how to write an S-tier work and activities section next. You're going to have relatively few characters to talk about each of the experiences that you bring in. There, you're going to be detailing all of the things you've done, what your experiences were, what your responsibilities were, and what the main outcomes were. What's not going to be clear is why those things mattered to you or where they fit into your broader narrative of growth. That brings us to one of the core elements of the personal statement. An effective personal statement must impose a sense of relevance on the things that you've done. It should make it clear for the reader why you did each thing and how each experience led you to the next. It should also be very explicit in naming how each experience you've had contributes to your vision of becoming a physician. Now that we understand insight, inspiration, and the meta function of the personal statement, we're ready to get into the I method. Let's unpack what the E, the I, and the I stand for. The I method, EII, is named for experience, insight, and inspiration, which we're going to use as the evidence, claims, and conclusion for every single paragraph in your personal statement. When you write like that, you're naturally going to communicate a sense of growth. The reader is going to be taken through what you did, why you did it, and what you did next. It's going to give them a clear understanding of how you became the pre-professional that you are today. So how do you go from that theoretical framework into an actual outline and then into the personal statement? Let's talk about that next. The first thing to do is imagine that you don't have 5 or 6 paragraphs to talk about yourself. You only have 5 or 6 sentences. Each sentence is a declarative sentence about you. The way to think about it is that if the admissions committee were to have read this paragraph, this is the one single takeaway that they would learn about you as a person and candidate. Now, if you're working on your personal statement in real time, this would be a great space to pause the video and go write those 5 or 6 sentences out. Once you've done that, realize that what you've just done is written the thesis sentence, the single main takeaway from every paragraph in your essay. Now, what a lot of people get wrong is that they will have written a sentence about what they did. But that's not really the point, as we've established. The point is what you learned or what you were inspired to do next. Now, once you've revised and you actually have the what I learned and what I was inspired to do next, you'll realize that every single sentence that you've written is either an inspiration or an insight. So bring back your I outline, E-I-I. Figure out whether you have an insight or an inspiration there, and then come up with the next one. So if you wrote something like, I feel inspired to work with disenfranchised populations, that's an inspiration. What was the insight that led you to feel inspired? If, on the other hand, you wrote, shadowing Dr. Smith showed me how access to primary care can change patients' lives, that's an insight. So what did it inspire you to do next? Now, if you've gone through your entire outline so far and you have an insight and an inspiration for every paragraph, the last piece is the experience. Now, going back to 9th grade English, the experience is the evidence you're going to use to substantiate the claims you're making about the insight and the inspiration. Now, I get asked all the time, should I bring in this experience or that experience? Which of these experiences is stronger? Which of these experiences is more competitive? My answer? No one cares. The way to think about it is, which of the possible experiences you could bring in most easily and clearly substantiates the point you're trying to make about the insight or the inspiration. Next, you want to think about, of the possible experiences you can bring in, which one is going to add a sense of motion or dimensionality. If you keep bringing in clinical experiences in every single paragraph, maybe you want to bring in a different thing about research, about athletics, about leadership, something that adds a bit of well-roundedness and dimension to your essay's character. Contrastingly, if you initially thought about writing about an experience that happened 12 years ago, but there's a more recent, mature, and involved experience that you could have written about instead, maybe choose the latter to bring out a greater sense of recency and maturity. You also want to think about the logic of your growth narrative. What did it make sense for this essay's character to have learned first that led them to the next and the next and the next thing? Realize that you could use any experience to highlight a number of different insights and inspiration. So figure out which experience, insight, inspiration pairing makes the most sense and fits best into the overall flow of the essay. If you've done all of that, you're now looking at an I method outline that captures the core stages of your growth into the pre-professional that you are today. Now, even if you understand the method, this is one of the biggest mistakes I see people make. Do not try to write a perfect draft. What you're going to do is grab a timer and set it for about 50 minutes. You have 50 minutes to brain dump a personal statement. I'm going to tell you straight up, it is going to be terrible, and that's exactly what you want. Just let the ideas flow. Expose yourself to the idea of writing something bad for the sake of getting it out. We'll talk more about this when we talk about the revision step, but you really want to get in the habit of being able to try out an idea without being so invested in it that you feel paralyzed. So you've written your first draft. Now it's a great time to talk about the 10 most common mistakes that I see in the personal statements that get sent to me for review. For a lot of people, your first interest in medicine came in when you're a child. Unfortunately, a lot of people bring this into their first paragraph and wind up introducing their essay's character to the admissions committee as a child. This happens when you have childhood keywords like when I was 4 years old, uncle, father, grandmother, mother, brother, sister, where you're framing yourself as a child because you're trying to make the reader see you as a child in that moment. Remember, this is not an autobiography. Don't do that. The other big mistake I see is lingering so much on the emotionality of the moment. I was so scared. We were panicked. We didn't know what to do. The tall doctors in the white coat came into the room. This is not a journal entry. Naming your passion, naming the impact those moments had to you can be done a lot more concisely so you can move on to the growth that actually matters. Instead, if you feel the need to lead with one of these early life experiences, give the reader the metabolized insight that came from years of reflecting on those moments and understanding how they drive you now. What really sets apart a top-tier applicant is their ability to derive meaning from it and articulate it in a relatable way. Mistake number 2 also often happens in the first paragraph, but you could see it anywhere. I'm talking about granular, novelistic scene building. This comes across when people are talking about the color of the clothes the patient was wearing, how sweaty their hands were, what the emergency department smelled like. This is a gross misrepresentation of what show not tell actually means in this context. In the context of a personal statement, show not tell means show them what your insights look like. Show them what your vision looks like. Don't just tell them that you have insights and have a vision. It does not mean show them the granular moments of things as if you're writing a fantasy novel, because at the end of the day, anyone can do that. Remember that concrete thinking is a hallmark of being a child. Instead, show them that you're able to abstract and deliver the meaningfulness of the moments through reflection, ultimately you'll have to find a balance between active voice, relatability and substance, and conciseness, directness, and maturity. The third mistake has been happening a lot more often since people have access to AI tools. I'm talking about not but sentence structures. As a silly example, imagine if you asked me what I had for breakfast, and I said, I had not sushi for breakfast, but cereal. What's wrong with you? Why would I talk like that, right? It's almost always more efficient, especially when you have limited character count, to just say the thing that you want to say, which in general is the clause that comes after the but. Otherwise, you can come off as overly dramatic, inefficient, and sounding kind of like an infomercial. I've seen not but sentence constructs show up 2, even 3 times in a single paragraph, lending themselves to run-on sentences and verbosity that does not make you look like an effective communicator. If you've been looking online for tips on how to write your personal statement, you almost certainly have been advised to make the 4th mistake that I commonly see: using individual moments to substantiate every paragraph in your personal statement. Think about it. Sometimes applicants have done something for 2, 3, 4, 500 hours, 1,000 hours plus, but when they write about it in the personal statement, they're writing about that one Tuesday afternoon where they encountered that one patient. Using patient stories can be very powerful if they're brought in especially formative moments or as representative of other broader insights that they saw over the broader course of their work. But if every single paragraph hinges on one specific moment, you can write an entire personal statement that makes it seem like your entire candidacy is based on a handful of hours of experience. Instead, use individual experiences sparingly. Zoom out and reflect on the whole body of work that you've done, that you're bringing into the insights and inspiration of each paragraph. That shows an ability to reflect and learn from a larger body of work, which is kind of what you're going to be expected to do in medical school. Mistake number 5 is a pretty easy one. I'm talking about overly long, visually dense paragraphs. Ideally, your paragraphs will be no more than 8 lines in length, plus or minus 1 line. When you have 10, 12, I've even seen 14 and 15 line long paragraphs, it's visually difficult for your reader to understand what the main idea is. Additionally, many times, admissions committees officers will be skimming your personal statement, either as a round 1 look over or when they're looking back at your application. The longer your paragraph is, the harder it is for them to see the main points that actually matter. Mistake number 6 is pontificating to doctors about what being a doctor is. This comes across in phrases like physicians must, doctors have to, medicine demands. Instead of speaking about physicianhood and doctoring in the abstract, talk about your own perspective. What inspired me most about Dr. So-and-so's approach to his patients was, to me, medicine is. Speak about your own perspective and it comes off as more relatable and humble. Quiet, silence, stillness. These 3 are among the most overused words and themes in personal statements. Just in the last few months, I had a client who used the word stillness 16 times in their personal statement. And oddly enough, these themes tend to come out even more when you use AI to edit your writing. I don't know why that is, but make sure that anything you bring in is specific and defined in context. Just because something is dramatic doesn't mean it's good. Other overused buzzwords that don't really mean anything include deeper, truly, more than just, or the real meaning of. Just be direct. The 8th mistake is coming off like an action hero. You do not want to be perceived as grandiose. Highlighting how grateful patients were for your intervention sounds egotistical. Using excessively dramatic storytelling language for a patient placing their hand in yours, or the way a patient looked at the doctor, can seem kind of gross, as though your desire to practice medicine is based on some sort of hero fantasy, which to me is a bit of a red flag. Mistake number 9 comes in when people have been online and learned that they have to have a theme for their personal statement. The theme of your statement is your growth. It is a naturally emergent property of effective writing. But what I often see is that people try to force a theme on their narrative, and in so doing, they come off as very one-dimensional and inauthentic. The fact of the matter is, you're a mess. I'm also a mess. Being human is messy. When you're able to organize the messiness of your life into a true narrative, where it's clear what you learned from each step along your journey and how it led you to the next one, that comes off as truly compelling. Remember that a one-dimensional theme is far less compelling than the multidimensional human being that you are. Mistake number 10 is academic excuses and oversharing. This is where someone brings in their C in organic chemistry into their personal statement. Remember that the personal statement is supposed to be a narrative of growth. It's supposed to take the reader through the most formative insights that you have that define your identity. I've seen people spend 1, 2, even 3 paragraphs rambling on about their poor grades. Then I talk to them about it and their GPA is a 3.8 and they have a C in organic chemistry. It comes off as really immature and insecure. Now, If your academic is something that really and truly shaped how you see the world and who you are, it's totally okay to bring it in. But be very cautious that you're not just excusing your sins as if it's some sort of weird confessional. Remember that there are other written materials in your med school application, not just the personal statement. Unless your academic challenges have been really formative and shape a part of who you are, they may be better suited to specific secondary essays, the other unique experiences essay on TMD SAS, or elsewhere depending on your specific circumstances. If there's something you're particularly worried about, this is a good place to consult a medical admissions consultant or an advisor at your university. Finally, we can talk about revision. The first thing that you're going to do is go through your personal statement and compare it to the I method outline that you wrote. Ask yourself whether each paragraph actually communicates the main idea that you intended. Be very harsh with yourself here. If you have a paragraph that does more than intended or less than intended, you need to refine it. Go through that list of 10 things we just spoke about. Have you made any of the common mistakes? If so, it's a signal that you should revise. But if every single paragraph has one clear and substantiated main idea, if it doesn't ramble on, if it's not too long, if there are no run-on sentences, if it flows from the preceding paragraph and naturally into the next, along a coherent narrative of growth, you've probably written something good enough. Now, when you get to this phase, it's going to be tempting to get advice from everybody you know. Do not do that. I recommend that you get advice from specifically 2 people. One of them is someone who knows you really well, whether or not they know anything about the med school application process. Your mother, your father, your brother, your best friend, a professor you spent a lot of time with on project or in office hours. Your question for this individual is, does this sound like me? And you want to ask if there's anything great about you that is not coming across in this essay because you missed it. The second person you want to ask for help from is an academic advisor or a medical admissions consultant or somebody who knows the modern med school application process. This person doesn't have to know you, and in fact, it might be a little bit better if they don't. Your question for them is, who is the author of this personal statement? If their impression of you is the one that you wanted to make, good job. If they misinterpreted you, if they didn't get the main idea, if they came to conclusions you wish they hadn't, don't argue with them. You need to do a better job. Your goal is to be as unequivocal as possible, so that 10 different reviewers with 10 different backgrounds and 10 different sets of biases could read your work and basically understand the same things about you. If both of those people say your personal statement is pretty good, and if it passed your round 1 review, it's time for the final pass through. This is where you read your personal statement aloud. If you run out of breath when you're reading a sentence, it might be a run-on sentence. If you're stumbling over a bunch of words, those might not be words that are actually words that you would use. If you're stumbling over the vocabulary, you might be a little bit too stilted or aloof, using sophisticated vocabulary because you think it makes you sound smart, when in reality, it just makes you sound less like who you are. Remember that your ears might catch things that your eyes miss. Remember that your job is not to sound impressive. Your job is to sound like your authentic, passionate self. Conciseness wins over drama. Authenticity wins over impressiveness. Quality of reflection wins over quantity of experience. If you have questions about to take your personal statement to the next level, leave a comment and you might inspire the next video. If you want to work individually with myself or a member of my expert consulting team, you can check out the link in the description. Remember that this is a process of iteration. Nobody knows how to do this on day 1. So take it slow and remember, you've got this.